Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name's Lori Schreier, a member of New Hampshire for Safe Technology. I wanted to mention two logistical things before I do the introduction. We are having some potential lightning storms in the areas where the Zoom host is located. So there is a slight chance that we could lose the connection. We hope not, but we just want to let you know if that happens, that's why. Also, I want to let you know that if you and your friends and family want to see more webinars, I will be putting in the chat upcoming webinars in August and September and the dates and the links to sign up for those, because it's always hard to absorb all the information in one webinar. So we hope you'll come back too. So I just wanted to say that I've been an active member of New Hampshire for Safe Technology for several years. Once I became aware of my own sensitivity to wireless technology and radiation, and learning the science, which convinced me that there's a lot of risks involved and we need to take care to protect ourselves. I got very involved advocating for a protective ordinance in Keene, New Hampshire. I live in Westmoreland, New Hampshire, not far from there. And we advocated for a protective local ordinance and also for a moratorium on the rollout of 5G small cells. We did get a moratorium for several months, which was later repealed by the city council when the pressure from the industry became really strong and threats of lawsuits occurred. So they did repeal that. But I think the point was that the city council members were educated and really did see that there were some severe risks that they needed to act on and be aware of. And so we all need to become educated. There's a lot to learn. And in New Hampshire, our goals for New Hampshire for Safe Technology is to inform, to empower, and to protect. And we're focusing on educating New Hampshire residents as well as others and legislators about the risks of wireless technology and safer solutions, and to build support for passage of statewide protective legislation, especially protective measures that were proposed by the New Hampshire Commission to study the health and environmental effects of emerging 5G technology. And they released a report in November 2020 with 15 recommendations of protective legislation. And one of those important ones is one you'll hear about tonight, which is HB 1644, which would require safer setbacks from residences, hospitals, nursing homes, daycares, and parks from wireless antennas and cell towers. And at this point, I'd like to welcome Cece Doucette, who is our presenter tonight and our friend and mentor from New Hampshire for Safe Technology. And I'd like to tell you a little bit about her. Cece has helped her children's schools become the first in the nation to take precautionary measures with wireless technology. She's the director of Massachusetts for Safe Technology, which has an amazing website I recommend. And she works with schools, communities, municipalities, legislators to address wireless radiation in public health. She's also the Education Services Director with the international nonprofit Wireless Education, which offers affordable 30-minute online training for schools and families and corporate safety induction. Cece was honored to co-chair the technology panel for the Health and Buildings Roundtable Conference at the National Institutes of Health, and to present state and local policy at the International EMF Medical Conference in 2021. She's been featured on Genius of Wellness, Boston 25 News, PBS, EMF Warriors, in EMF Summits with Lloyd Burrell, Josh Jasol, and Patrick Vanderbergen, and also in the films Generation Zapped and Wi-Fi Refugees. So enjoy the presentation and welcome, Cece.
Oh, thank you so much, Lori. It's such a pleasure to be here. Let me see if I can do the spotlight here. And I'm going to go ahead and do a screen share, and I'll have some slides that we can go through. Deb, can you give me a nod if you can see my slides? Okay, thank you so much. So welcome everybody. And I owe such a debt of gratitude to Jennifer White, Deb Hodgson, who's with us tonight, Lori Schreier, who just gave us her wonderful introduction, and all the residents of New Hampshire who have brought this issue forward to their legislators. We are learning more and more that it really is the public that decides how this issue goes down. If we don't use our voices and speak up, then we don't empower our legislators to work on our behalf. So our hope tonight is that we will share enough information with you that it will pique your curiosity. It will give you a level of comfort that the facts are truly the facts, and that you might share those then with others in your community and your family and your professional circles, so that we can all learn together how to recognize the risks of wireless technology and then move towards safe technology solutions. Okay, can we just give a reminder that everybody please mute if you're not speaking? We will be doing questions and answers at the end, so go ahead and jot down your questions as we go, and we'll do our best to get to them. You can also drop them into the chat. So this MTPW after my name just means that I had the privilege of earning a master's of technical and professional writing from Northeastern University with an undergraduate degree in communication. So I'm really honored to be able to use my skill set to do this work to help others understand wireless risks. And here's our little sign. Lori mentioned that we became the first in the nation to start taking these precautionary measures. And this is what is posted in Ashland Public Schools here in Massachusetts, to turn the devices off, only turn them on when you actually need to use them, for starters. Only turn the Wi-Fi on when needed, because right now in most of our schools, the wireless is just pulsating radiation all the time. And as we'll see in a moment, always place the mobile device on a solid surface that's not your body. So we became the first in the nation to do that in 2014. I met with my state senator, Karen Spilka, who is now the Senate president in Massachusetts, and I shared the facts with her. She introduced legislation in 2015, and we have had legislation on the books here for far too long, for 7 or 8 years. And as we'll see in a moment, when Deb Hodgson opened up this important conversation with her legislators, they wound up introducing a bill that got passed into law in just 7 months to investigate this issue. And we're still trying to get traction like that in Massachusetts. So we're very grateful to be here with New Hampshire, standing shoulder to shoulder to show that this is a critically important issue. And I also have had the privilege on this journey of connecting with many of the world's leading scientists and doctors. And some of us put together this little nonprofit where we've distilled this whole issue down to facts that can be taken in a little online course in about a half an hour to teach schools, to teach families, to teach the workforce what these risks are and how to mitigate. We are moving our course to a learning management system instead of our old proprietary system. So those courses will come back online after this summer. And then I was so honored to get to know others in Massachusetts, and we kind of pulled together and started doing a monthly meeting, and then we received funding to build a website. And so we now formally have Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And we have a plethora of resources out there for you to see what the science is, how to recognize microwave sicknesses, and what we've been doing at the state level to try and get this addressed. So we invite everybody to go out to Massachusetts for Safe Technology and join us. That will put you on my mailing list. And I try not to clog inboxes, but if there are important updates and breaking news, we will send those, as well as opportunities to take action in your own community. I like to include this next link. Somebody down at the National Institutes of Health found my work and liked the way I presented information and asked me to co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference, which was such an honor. But with this link, people can go and watch very short, highly credible presentations from Dr. Martin Pall, who is one of the world's leading scientists on this, Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. He's speaking out on this issue, and he founded Canadians for Safe Technology. We also had Theodora Scarrato, who is the executive director of the Environmental Health Trust, which is arguably the world's largest database and think tank on the wireless radiation issue. And then we also had Peter Sullivan. And I found Peter's work through a lecture that I watched online. And he was telling how he became really sick. He dropped too much weight, his teeth were getting brittle, and he used to be a fighter pilot. And so he was up with the natural high levels of radio frequency, also in a plane equipped with radar, which is this microwave radiation, and then inside the plane with the instrumentation panel that's pulsating microwave radiation all the time. So Peter got very sick. And then his children, his two sons, when they came up to the preschool years, they both wound up on the autism spectrum. And Peter did what most parents of children on the spectrum will do. They'll start looking at what environmental factors could be affecting their child if they don't have a genetic proclivity for autism. So if it didn't come from mom or dad, it came from somewhere in the environment. So they will often do things like go to a clean organic diet to get the pesticides and chemicals out of the body. They might do a heavy metal detox to get the metals that store in our tissues out of the body. And then what Peter said is today, he would tell every parent of an autistic child to remove the wireless radiation exposures. And in many cases, we see not only full recovery, but for those who may not fully recover, great improvements in their abilities and their communication skills. So I was so enthralled with Peter Sullivan's story, and he was very gracious to fly in and present with us at the National Institutes of Health. So great, quick talks from all of those experts there. And then when I fell down the rabbit hole with this issue, when I first started figuring this out in 2013, I recognized we had a huge gap because people were getting very sick, children and adults, and getting misdiagnosed because we didn't have a way to professionally train our doctors, our nurses, our first responders, and all of our other healthcare practitioners. And so I was so humbled and so grateful to be asked to be a presenter at the Electromagnetic Fields Medical Conference. Now that little term EMF stands for electromagnetic fields, and these are the pulses of microwave radiation that come out of everything wireless. We hear about megahertz. That means in 1 second, this radiation jackhammers us 1 million times per second. In the gigahertz range, that means these electromagnetic fields pulse this microwave radiation at us 1 billion times per second. And our own electromagnetic field that's meant to be in sync with the earth, that's 7.83 hertz. So 7 times per second, not 1 million, not 1 billion. So we have really inundated ourselves with this man-made radio frequency radiation. So what I'd like to do now is tell you why my schools wound up putting that sign in our classrooms. It started when they read the legal fine print. So there is a website called See the Fine Print from our friends at the Environmental Health Trust, and they have a lot of the disclaimers that are in the fine print that come with our devices. So for anybody with us tonight who happens to own an iPhone, I will walk you through how to see the legal fine print in your iPhone. And for others who have a different kind of phone, maybe an Android or a Google phone, if you just type in your make and model into your browser and then type in RF for radio frequency, RF exposure, you'll be able to pull up the fine print that came with your device. But on your iPhone, from settings, scroll down just a little bit and hit general. On a really old phone, you'd hit about, but by now most people have upgraded their phones. So from general, go all the way down to legal and regulatory. Once you're at legal and regulatory, there's a little menu, and about 4 down, you'll see RF exposure. This is electromagnetic fields of radio frequency, microwave radiation that the industry politely calls energy. And what they tell us in that legal fine print is 2 really important things. One, this device was tested at a distance away from the body. So if you put that device in your bra or your suit pocket or your shirt pocket, or if you tuck it in your waistband, or if you put it in your pocket on the behind, with these radiation antennas transmitting, you're exceeding the FCC limits for public radiation exposure. And those limits, by the way, were never tested for biological effects. And we'll tell you what those effects are in just a minute. In the second paragraph in that legal fine print, they recommend that you use a hands-free option. The reason for that is that there are 5 or 6 or more antennas in one single cell phone. And each one of those antennas is individually constantly pulsing a microwave signal to say, here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? To the nearest cell tower or router. And today's message is certainly not no technology, because we know that much of our lives is organized and run through technology. Our message tonight is safe technology, and we absolutely know how to get there. So we'll teach you baby steps that you can start taking, and then ways that you can further the conversation to start protecting your neighborhoods and your town. So that legal fine print's been in there all along. Most people don't know. And when I was learning about this, I was having a hard time getting my mind around something that's invisible. But if the pandemic has taught us anything with COVID-19, is we need to be very vigilant about invisible toxins in our environment. So I figured out through the help of others that there are radio frequency detection meters that we can get to see these invisible toxins and to hear these invisible toxins. So what I'm holding in my hand now is called the Safe and Sound Pro 2 radio frequency broadband detection meter. And when I turn this on, we will see that it lands in the flashing green. That's what you want to aim for. That's the best that we can do today. When it starts going yellow, red, and flashing red, we get into a heavy dose of microwave radiation. So right now, the maximum amount of radiation on my meter in my home is 4.3. And in general, the science indicates we should have it under 10. 10 what? 10 microwatts per square meter. So in a square meter of air, how much radiation is in there of this man-made radio frequency? So we want to keep it under 10 if we can. Sometimes people who are electrically sensitive, if they can remediate all the other things in their environment, they might be able to do okay with 100. But I want to give you a demonstration now of what happens when I activate my cell phone. So as a rule, I keep it in airplane mode. And when I turn on my cell phone, we have these antennas transmitting. You can hear what's going on with this meter, and it's not good. And look at how it pops up to this red as it makes these handshakes with the nearest cell tower or router. This is what our poor cells are up against all the time. So I prefer, knowing what I know, to choose safe technology. So I'm going to put my cell phone back in airplane mode, and people know to get me through my hardwired computer in my email, or I have a landline, and you can just forward cell phone calls to a landline. So let's look and see what this did do. Remember, we were at 4. Just turning on my cell phone without even doing anything pushed us up to 240,000 microwatts per square meter. And I've seen this go up over 1 million if there was something being downloaded to my phone. So this can teach us what's in our environment. We can gather that data and then slowly, carefully begin to reduce our exposure. So that is actually the radio frequency detection meter that was recommended at the EMF medical conference so that doctors can put this in their office, loan it out to patients. And I know a chiropractor here in Massachusetts who attended the medical conference, and now she bought one and she puts it out to her patient. She loans it to them for $10 for 2 hours. That means they got to boogie home, take their measurements and bring it right back so that they don't go, oh, I don't want to believe this. If they really want to get a hold of their health issues, they need to remove this radiation from their environment. So knowing what I know, that there's a tool out there to help us, I went after a grant and I got one of these. This is another version of another model, and it was developed a few years before the Safe and Sound Pro 2. This one just has a little bit more current technology in it, but they're both fine meters. So back in 2016, it took me 3 tries with my town, 3 application cycles, but I finally educated them enough to where they voted to put a radiation detection meter on loan in our public library. So now anybody with our library card can go and take this out, walk around their home, their office, their schools, their cars, and just get the facts. How much radiation are we exposed to? And then one by one, let's figure out how we can bring that down so that we're not constantly bombarded with this radiation. So other libraries around Massachusetts and around the country are looking for inspiration from our pilot program here and are starting to put these radiation detection meters in their local libraries too. My local cable station has been so wonderful. They sent somebody to my house with their camera and we produced a 23-minute public service announcement where we did a walkthrough of my house where I turned on the wireless signals and got the readings. And then I just turned everything off and taught people how you can choose to hardwire your technology. So when I say hardwire, that doesn't mean you have to do anything fancy. On the back of your router, there are Ethernet ports. If you plug in an Ethernet port with an Ethernet cable and you just run it to wherever you use your technology in your home or office, who knew you can buy a little adapter for an iPhone or a different kind of phone that has a hardwired component to their operating system. And then once you plug in, it doesn't automatically disable the wireless. Hopefully in the future, our engineers will be asked to do that. But for now, once you plug it in, you just go into your settings and turn off the wireless antenna, the Bluetooth antenna, the locator, the data, the hotspot, the cellular. And if anybody didn't know any better than to already upgrade to a 5G phone, you very likely have additional antennas in there than you can disable. And once you're hardwired, not only are you safer, but your signal will be so much faster and far more reliable. Your data is not flying through the air for anybody to intercept. So your data security and privacy are always hands down going to be better with a hardwired connection. So it's not rocket science. We know how to do this, but let's give you a little bit more information so that you can start gaining a level of comfort for wanting to think about making these changes in your technology use. So let's look at the long-term effects that are being shown in the scientific literature. So this study over here was completed over 20 years by the US National Toxicology Program. They are part of the National Institutes of Health, and they are the gold standard across the world for toxics research. This is the largest study of any kind they have ever undertaken, $30 million. They went in 2 decades ago when 2G and 3G were the technology of the day, expecting to prove that cell phones are safe. Instead, they had an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the National Institutes of Health in which world-leading scientists and doctors whose life's work is microwave radiation. In their final report, they determined clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage. Now, clear evidence is the highest of 5 categories they can assign to their findings. So there is no doubt that this causes cancer. And every time a good study comes out, the wireless industry is prone to spinning it some way to create doubt. So with this one, they would say, oh, that's just one study. You need to have more science to show this is really happening. Well, right after we published our large finding on cell phones here in the US, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy completed another large study on the cell tower base stations that corroborated everything we found with the cell phone. So regardless of where this radiation is coming from, the World Health Organization in 2011 determined this is a group 2B possible human carcinogen. Now that's in the same category as lead and thalidomide and a whole bunch of other chemicals that I can't even pronounce. So when they did that, they said this applies to all electromagnetic fields of man-made radio frequency radiation. So it doesn't matter where it's coming from. It's all toxic because it pulses these spiked erratic signals at our bodies, and our bodies, we're bioelectrical beings. We're not equipped to deal with that kind of bombardment. We need a break so that our bodies have time to cell repair and regenerate. So these studies are very important. And once it was identified through the animal studies, which was what was missing back in 2011 when the World Health Organization first classified this as a possible human carcinogen. What was missing at that point in time were these animal studies. Now that we have them, world-leading scientists and doctors are saying it's time for the World Health Organization to reinvestigate this and give it a higher classification as a group 1 carcinogen, or at least a group 2B probable carcinogen. So cancers are just the tip of the iceberg, and the industry has focused on cancer for a long time because it takes the longest to manifest. And in the meantime, they can spin up and sell us their toxic products without any accountability. But there's a lot else that's happening here too. DNA damage. That is the roadmap to grow a proper anything, a fetus, a child, a plant, a pollinator, our pets. And when we start damaging the DNA, that carries through generation upon generation. So we are doing something really bad in our world, but we have a lot of solutions that we'll talk about in a bit. It was the infertility studies that got me on my feet because I started reading the science, and they have taken male human sperm, exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it changed the DNA. It slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable, or apoptosis, which is programmed cell death, in just 4 hours of laptop exposure. And I was horrified. Our oldest daughter had just gone off to college with her MacBook. Our youngest daughter had just started high school, and for Christmas, we gave her a laptop. And where they both using them, but right on top of their reproductive organs. And we have additional studies that show that women who use wireless transmissions during their pregnancies have higher miscarriage rates. Dr. Hugh Taylor out at Yale Medical, he heads up the OBGYN program at Yale. He's done the rodent studies that showed when you expose the pregnant mice to this radio frequency radiation, those pups come out bouncing off the walls, not a care in the world, much like the attention span of a child with ADHD or ADD. So lots of good, solid science telling us this. And this is a neurotoxin. We have the science to show that we have something called the blood-brain barrier, and we have a gut-brain barrier as well. We have these membranes in our body and in our brain that protect us from allowing toxins when they're being escorted out of the body through the bloodstream. These barriers protect us from having that go into sensitive areas. Well, now the science is showing that this bombardment of microwave radiation pulsation is compromising those barriers. It's opening up the blood-brain barrier. So now when toxins are being escorted out through our bloodstream, they can take a turn and go into our brains. And we wonder why we have so many children and adults suffering from neurological disorders. Dr. Martha Herbert, who founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Hospital, sees huge correlations between what we know scientifically happens with microwave exposures and what she sees in the families in her care. And Alzheimer's, Dr. Martin Pall this spring just came out with a new paper that discusses earlier and earlier onset of Alzheimer's. It used to take 25 years to manifest, and now we're seeing Alzheimer diagnosis in 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds, 60-year-olds. You don't have to be 70 or 80 to get Alzheimer's anymore. So this is happening more and more in our society. We are so grateful that the Environmental Working Group is now putting out information. Some of you may be familiar with the Environmental Working Group with their work on pesticides. They have something called the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen to guide the public on what produce you can buy without getting a very high concentration of chemicals in your produce. So we're so grateful. They just came out with a paper that discusses the effects of radiofrequency radiation on the nervous system, and we can get that fact sheet here. And then Dr. Om Gandhi is one of the scientists, and he did this modeling, where as an adult, these heads up here are models turned sideways. The yellow part is the ear. If you put a cell phone up to an adult brain, that radiation is going inside your brain about a third of the way. On a 10-year-old child, it's permeating into the brain about 2/3 of the way through. And on a 5-year-old child, when you put a wireless device on a child like this, it's going almost the entire way into and through the brain. And children are not just little adults. Their skulls are thinner, so they are absorbing more radiation. They have a higher water content in their brain, and this radiation activates around water. So very dangerous. It's not a toy. A child should never, ever be handed a wireless device unless all the antennas are turned off. It's in airplane mode, and whatever you're giving them to entertain themselves with is already downloaded on the device, so that when you hand a device to a child, they're using it in dummy mode and not radiating themselves. So we need to take care of our kids, our planet, and ourselves. So those were some of the long-term effects. What is the science telling us in the short term? Well, I think a lot of people, once we start this conversation, begin to recognize these electromagnetic illnesses. And we should know that the Americans with Disabilities Act, since I think it was like 2002, has long since recognized electromagnetic sensitivities, and they offer, job area network accommodations, what we should do in the workplace, hardwire things, don't put routers up near people who need to have accommodations. So our government has known about this for decades. Insomnia is huge. So many children and adults don't sleep right anymore. What we've learned through the science is in the wee hours of darkness, as part of our circadian rhythm, our brain will release melatonin in the wee hours of darkness. Melatonin goes in and regulates our sleep, but also does cell repair and regeneration. What happens when we have these pulsations of microwave radiation going day and night, our brain thinks the lights are on, because this is a light energy form. And if the lights are on, the brain's not going to release the melatonin to help us do our proper cell repair and regeneration and to get us into those deep sleep cycles. So this is one reason why so many people don't sleep right anymore. But the good news is after learning a little bit about this, people will come to me and say, I didn't want to know about this. because I love my technology, but I started to recognize some of these symptoms. And so I took a chance and I turned everything off in the house. And by golly, I slept through the night for the first time in ages. We hear the same thing about headaches, stabbing, searing headaches, sometimes migraines. That was one symptom that my daughter was having in high school. What high schooler should be getting a migraine? I circled my tail for a couple of months as I was learning this because I didn't want it to be true. But once I committed to protecting my family, and we simply hardwired our technology and turned off all the antennas, my daughter's headaches, her nosebleeds, all but disappeared unless she would let herself get dehydrated and then she'd get a headache or a nosebleed. But by and large, by giving her a safe sleep sanctuary, her symptoms resolved. Chronic fatigue, pain from unidentified sources, skin abnormalities that often include heating. If you're getting hot from your cell phone to your head, that is your body telling you this is not safe. For me, my pinky finger starts tingling. So heating, tingling, flushing, rashes. We have little antennas in the surface of our skin. And when they get overpowered by microwave radiation, some people start to get rashes all over their body. Heartbeats that go too fast or too slow. And again, we are biologically, every one of us is different. So what might present in you, your partner, your children might be perfectly fine with today. But this is cumulative. How much can our body store and keep up with and cell repair before it hits a tipping point? Somebody could be perfectly fine today and tomorrow they are fried with many of these symptoms. Cognitive impairment, sometimes you open the fridge and go, what did I come in here for, right? That's kind of normal when we've got our brain doing a lot of multitasking and stuff, but we are seeing serious cognitive impairment now, not just in the elderly where we start to lose some of our cognitive abilities with age, but we are seeing cognitive impairment in children and adults of all ages. Anger and behavior issues. When we were at the EMF medical conference, it was just heartbreaking to hear these doctors say that this radiation is changing the gray matter and the white matter of the brain that control our impulses and that control our angers and our behaviors. And that if we keep inundating ourselves and our communities with all of this wireless radiation, we can very well expect more of these societal outbursts like we've been seeing with the mass shootings. A couple of months ago, we had news hitting here in Boston from 3 different schools in Boston where the children were literally beating on their classmates with their Chromebooks. What did we do in the pandemic? We allowed the children to access their education from home. We gave every child a wireless tablet with no safety instruction. And here the parents and guardians are likely having to work from home. And not that that would be their first choice, but many times they're using this technology as a babysitter. So the kids are getting excessive exposure because they're given free rein to use these devices and probably have not been taught to download the content, turn off the antennas, or simply hardwire and turn off the antennas. So the anxiety, the depression, the suicidal ideation, we were at epidemic proportions of anxiety and depression even before the pandemic, as we become more and more saturated in microwave radiation. Dr. Martin Pall has synthesized a lot of the science in this paper here, addressing the neuropsychiatric effects of this biological environmental toxin. So that's a good paper. And again, you can get to all of this through the links throughout my presentation. So it's bad enough for you and I, but it's not just about you and I. Every biological cell on the planet is incompatible with this man-made radio frequency radiation. And we have excellent resources at this link. Dr. Cindy Russell, who founded Physician for Safe Technology, wrote this paper, A Wireless Silent Spring. This paper was written decades ago that we better watch out for our birds and bees and mankind. And yet the industry has just forced their way in. And now we wonder why our pollinators are disappearing in huge numbers. It's not just the neonicotinoids. We certainly need to get ahead of the chemicals, but we are overpowering our poor little pollinators with this constant bombardment of microwave radiation. Birds, we have reports when 5G has gone live, when they were testing it in The Hague in the Netherlands, hundreds of birds literally dropped dead out of the sky. We have reports of ships that have put the antennas on the top of the cruise ships. The birds are attracted to the energy, but then when they get caught up in it, they get overpowered, and we have birds dropping on the cruise ships. And then for climate change, we need to understand that wireless in all of the warehouses and all of the networks and all of our devices are consuming huge amounts of energy all the time, unless we learn to make our personal choices to control what we do and start there. So wireless consumes 10 times more energy than doing the responsible choice, which is hardwired technology to our buildings and then pick up with cables indoors. And you don't even want to know what's going on down in the Congo and other areas where there are human atrocities taking place to get the many, many minerals that are put into each one of our wireless devices. You know, if we had a good handle on that, we would never listen to the industry where they say, woohoo, ditch your old phone, we've got something shinier here. We would condition ourselves to use every single piece of technology through its complete useful life and then recycle it. But the industry keeps pushing more and more and more to grow their profits. The data warehouses, the networks, our own devices, streaming consumes huge amounts of energy. The first step, download your content onto your device and then turn off all those antennas and just watch the movies or listen to the music or read the books right from your device, and then you don't need any radiation. Whatever's on that device is yours to enjoy, but the streaming takes up huge amounts of energy. And we should know that the wireless industry is buying up the companies that are offering the streaming content, because that's another one of their new revenue sources. So as much as they're pushing it out to us, we need to become consumers who can discriminate and understand what it is that we're buying into and learn to do it differently so we can do it safely. Every time we send and receive some cute little emoji or text or whatever, wirelessly, we're consuming energy. Every time we charge and recharge and recharge and recharge, we're consuming energy. And then in the background, all those apps that we've been talked into thinking we need to have that most of us don't even use on a regular basis, they're back there doing their constant updates. So take all those off your devices if you're not actually using them all the time or they're consuming energy too. So one of my biggest questions when I fell down the rabbit hole with this is, if this is as bad as everything I'm reading in the scientific literature, surely somebody's got to have our backs on this. And again, I figured this stuff out in 2013. In 2015, Harvard's Law School Center for Ethics came up with this incredible free online 59-page report that's called Captured Agency: How the Federal Communications Commission is Dominated by the Industries it Presumably Regulates. And look at this wonderful graphic they chose. It's a revolving door, right? Because the industry is more than welcome at the FCC. In fact, most of our FCC commissioners today came from industry, and they are not representing the public interest. They are representing the wireless and the telecom industries. So this was my missing puzzle piece. And I went, oh man, so you mean to tell me nobody at the federal level has our backs on this? And then we came to learn when the National Toxicology Program did that $30 million study. It was commissioned by the Food and Drug Administration 20 years ago. Today, The gentleman who heads up the radiation area in the FDA is somebody entirely different. And he turned around, and instead of implementing public policy to protect us, now that we know this is clearly a carcinogen, among other things, instead of protecting us with public policy, Dr. Shuren turned around to the FCC and said, nothing to look at here. Go ahead, keep doing what you're doing. Go ahead with those really high radiation limits that we allow. No need to change that. And one might ask, what would ever possess Dr. Shuren to do something like that? Well, when we look, and you don't have to dig deep, just go look to see who Dr. Jeffrey Shuren is. He's married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents the wireless industry and the chemical industries. And it's just, we've got these conflicts of interest up and down our federal agencies. So we need to continue to work at that level. But the now retired director of the National Institutes for Environmental Health Sciences, which oversaw the National Toxicology Program, her name is Dr. Linda Birnbaum, and she said there are still some really good people at the federal level, but there are definitely captured agencies, and it's going to take state and local pressure coming up to probably enact change at the federal level. So we need to come out of our comfort zones and learn to use our voices once we get our heads around this and secure our own environment. So this is all we need to do in our own spaces for the areas that we have control over. Here's what safe technology looks like. Step one, just choose to hardwire your technology. And again, it looks complicated because there's wires and cables and connectors, but really, folks, it's not that hard. On the back of your router, here's the Ethernet ports. You want to talk to your internet service provider after you hardwire and say, teach me how to turn off those antennas in my router. And they can teach you how to do it right online from your own computer. You get a big long Ethernet cable and run it to the room or the rooms where you do most of your technology access. For people who have more than one device, and most people have a tablet, a laptop, a computer, a printer, and on, you can get an Ethernet switch, which you can think of as like an extension cord for electronics. And you can just simply plug in, this cable would go in here, and then you can get little cables for each one of your devices and plug them in. And the nice thing here is, instead of competing with wireless in your space for bandwidth for all the different devices that people in your building might be using, every one of these little Ethernet ports has its own internet address. So you're not competing for bandwidth. You're getting a direct link to the internet that's coming off the road into your house. And then, as I said, you can just buy these little adapters for your cell phones, for your tablets, for your laptops, and then just go into each one and turn off all of the wireless antennas. And then, as I mentioned, this is the landline that I use. Cost me about $30. I ordered it online with Staples. And we can forward cell phone calls when we're not on the go, right to our landline. So always remember, things don't turn off the antennas automatically yet. Hopefully in the future they will. But you need to go into the devices, disable the antennas, and then we really encourage people to invest in a radio frequency detection meter. If it's cost prohibitive, this one from the medical conference sells for just under $400. If that's too expensive, maybe you can get your friends and neighbors to go in on it. If everybody kicks in $10 or $20, then you guys could have one, or ask your library to put one on loan. And that way, every time you bring home a new electronic device, you can measure, because with the Internet of Things, they are looking to put these radiation transmitters in everything from baby diapers. They've got a little thing you can stick on a baby diaper that'll go to your cell phone and tell you if your child has soiled itself. I mean, good Lord, pick up the baby and do the sniff test like we always did, right? So we've gone a little overboard. They've got something called the iPotty, so you can put the iPad on the potty seat and the kid can sit there and play with games and stuff while they're toilet training, and it's crazy. But we just bought a stove, and my husband had it delivered, and it said something like wireless on it. I don't want to be able to turn my stove off and on when I'm not home. I don't think that's a very smart safety choice, but that's where the technology is going. So I looked in the settings. There was no way for me to disable that antenna. My girlfriend's stove, we could go right into settings and disable the antenna, but on mine, we couldn't. And then I went and I looked and I read the RF exposure warning that came with this particular stove. And it said, stay 20 centimeters away or you will exceed the FCC limits for public radiation exposure. And I don't know about you, but I can't stand 8 inches away from my stove and expect to cook dinner, nor do I want to stand that close to a radiation transmitter. So we wound up having to I called the manufacturer, they sent a technician out and he didn't know about this. He didn't know what to do. And honestly, he didn't want to hear about it. But ultimately, I showed him the reading I was getting off of this stove, and it was over 1 million. It was 1,090,000 microwatts per square meter. And he took off the back of the stove, and behind the digital display is the motherboard. And then next to the motherboard was a little tiny board. And all he had to do was unplug that one plug that controlled the antenna for the radio frequency radiation. And then I measured again, and there was no radiation. I was back down to my quiet levels in my home. But for anybody who's building a new home, for anybody who's doing renovations, all these appliances are coming in. So it's really critical to have an antenna finder, right? We need these radiation detection meters to be able to properly identify. There are some that are just under $200. The reason why I like to recommend this one is Dr. Magda Havas up in Canada is a professor emeritus from Trent University who taught electromagnetics for 25 years. She's now doing a global study asking citizen scientists to help her to get data for her database. So with one of these meters, the Safe and Sound Pro 2, any citizen can go take readings using her little protocol you can put on a clipboard and go be a little scientist, and take readings in your community and put that into her database. So we can have that data and we can go to our town and say, look how we stack up against these other towns. We need to get on the ball here and get protective ordinances in our zoning. And then for people who are sick or who don't want to get sick, her map will show us where there might be some green areas as opposed to yellow, red, or blackout areas. So measuring is critically important. We'll show you Dr. Havas's website in a few moments. And she will, the gentleman who makes this particular meter has offered her a discount for any of the citizen scientists. So she can give you the code for the discount too, which I think I paid $308 for mine. So let's just do a real quick overview. We've talked a lot about the exposures that we have control over, all of our devices, all of our smart security systems and stuff. But there are some that may be out of our control. When I was a little girl playing hide and seek, I'd be hiding in the bushes, and to keep myself occupied while I was waiting to be found, I'd sit there and watch the little dials go round and round on the meters, whether it be gas, electric, water, and now solar. Our towns have been talked out of those good, solid analog meters that lasted for decades and have been told the latest and greatest is a smart meter or a digital meter. Well, they're really a bad idea. So they pulse this radiation continuously. I measured, we have 2 electric meters, one for our regular electric and one for the solar system we installed. They're mounted outside my dining room, and inside my dining room, I put the meter up against the wall and it pulsed 17,000 times a day. So if somebody is sleeping on the other side of one of these meters, you know, that's bad news. A child whose DNA is still developing, an elderly person who needs to protect their faculties, a pregnant woman, a child, and anybody with an existing health condition, we know scientifically is an especially vulnerable subpopulation. But it's not just these subpopulations. At the medical conference, the doctors were telling us that they see a lot more patients with electromagnetic illnesses when these smart meters go in. And worse, this radiation amplifies around metal. So it can literally hop on the wires or the pipes of your home if they're not properly grounded and turn your whole home into a radiating antenna. We also have lots of documentation on fires and explosions, but we also know that they're taking our data from these smart meters and selling it to third-party vendors who would want to sell us their products. And that's a huge infringement on privacy. Others suggest that our governments are taking this data for more nefarious reasons. I really care just about the biological effects mostly here. And as we've seen these toxic corporations do with environmental justice, they will take their toxic products into communities where they're largely minority, underprivileged, and don't have the wherewithal or the time. They may be working 3 jobs just to put food on the table and a roof over their head, and they won't be tuning into this issue. So they roll out these toxic programs and say, look, it was successful here. Now we're going to roll it out against your whole state. And that's exactly what they did in Worcester, Massachusetts. National Grid went in and rolled out a pilot program for these smart meters for electric. And then without telling the customers, there was no informed consent. They turned around and want to roll it out all across the state. And they're holding it up to New York and to Connecticut and Rhode Island saying, look how successful we were. Now we're going to do it in your state too. Isn't this great? But it's not. It's very dangerous. And Jeremy Johnson is a Silicon Valley engineer, and he and his wife, who is a medical doctor, all of a sudden got really, really sick. And neither one of them from their training or background could figure it out until they researched their symptoms and recognized that it was when a bank of smart meters went in under their condo that they got way overexposed. So Jeremy Johnson has done an excellent TED Talk. And it can be hard to have these conversations with engineers or physicists or technologists because they've only been taught that you have to have heat from a device to have harm. That's the only thing the FCC accounts for is how much heat from one device in a half an hour would it take to raise the temperature of your skin. Has nothing to do with what it's doing to our brain or our heart or our reproductive organs or our skin or our eyes. They're only basing this on heat. And we know scientifically that, yeah, heat can cause harm, but those limits are set way up here. And at the non-thermal, non-heat level, we have studies, thousands of studies showing biological effects at hundreds of thousands of times below what the FCC and the wireless industry are still allowed to do. So we have good resources for engineers and stuff as well. And then the other thing that we don't have direct control over are these cell towers that are coming in more and more. So these are the macro cell towers up here, the big cell towers, and then the antennas that they now start popping up on buildings right where people are, radiating them if they can blend it in with the color of the building. So there's a great need to look at the non-industry funded science. And I have, being a tech writer, I dove in to try and find what I needed to know. And then I got way in over my head and couldn't remember where to get back to resources that I found to be credible. And so being a tech writer, I just started a very simple research repository that I called Understanding EMFs because I needed to understand what EMFs were. So no bells and whistles, just straight bullet points with bolding on things that you can quickly skim and grab the resources that you might be looking for to open this conversation or to just simply learn for yourself. So it's critically important that we look at the non-industry funded science because in big tobacco fashion, as that captured agency report taught us, the industry will fund their own science done under conditions that deliberately show no harm. Or if their studies show harm, they bury it. So it's critically important that we go to the non-industry funded science that's showing all these biological effects. And there is a website called antennasearch.com where anybody can go pop in an address, be it your home or your office or your schools, and it will typically give you a 3-mile radius of all these macro cell, all the big cell antennas and cell towers. And what the science is showing us is that we should never have these things within 500 meters of where we spend our time, which is 1,640 feet. And the reason that the science does that is that there's a curve. And within this curve, we see a higher death rate, higher neurotoxicity, insomnia and stuff. So the curve starts coming down at that 500-meter mark. It doesn't actually catch up with the general population on the death rate until double that, around 1,000 meters or 3,000 feet. So that 500-meter setback is already a compromise, but that's where it starts going down. So we should never have any of this cell equipment any closer than that, and it should certainly be further. In the scientific literature, they say a half a mile for people who are vulnerable subpopulations, like children at schools, at home, hospitals, nursing, all of that, we should have great distance. So when I put in our State House address in Boston, the industry has inundated Boston and most of our major cities with so much radiation that it couldn't give me the typical 3-mile return. It could only give me 1 mile. And within 1 mile of our State House, there were 70 cell towers and 1,184 big antennas. And this is a map of one of our Boston neighborhoods in Hyde Park. And you can see these things are just everywhere. And that's what the industry has done to our towns. Now add on what we call 5G small cells. So 5G, simply enough, means 5th generation technology that followed 1G, 2G, 3G, and 4G. But it's a whole different technology, and it's actually a marketing term. We don't actually have a definition of what 5G is because the industry is pulling different signal lengths or frequencies from all different parts of what's called the electromagnetic spectrum. So they've got long waves, short waves, mid-range waves, but this time they're adding on millimeter waves. And they're spinning it that will get faster entertainment downloads. Remember, they're buying up the entertainment industry, so this is good for them. Smart cities, superhighways, etc. But it's not good for you and I, and it's certainly not good for the environment. So adding on top of the 4G waves, the longer waves that can get through buildings and to your phone and to your devices, they're adding all that's left of the electromagnetic spectrum, which is these crummy little millimeter waves. But they're telling us faster, faster, faster. Well, it can bring great quantities of data, but it can't go very far. And these millimeter waves can't go through buildings very easily. So they're bundling it with the 3G and the 4G and adding on a whole new layer of toxicity. So yeah, it can't go through trees, it can't go through buildings, but what they're doing is taking all this radiation with the millimeter waves and beam forming it, all this power into a beam. So the 3G and the 4G are going to be finding your device. They're going to be scanning pulsing radiation to find that device. And then once they do, the 5G millimeter waves will beam form and hit your device and go through every single thing in its pathway. You, your children, your pets, your pollinators, and every other living organism is going to get a big beam of microwave radiation. And they're clear cutting trees because the trees block signal. So it's just a raw deal for our environment on so many levels. And in order for 5G to fly, they're going to have to put up cell towers, these what they call small cell antennas, but there's nothing small about the risk. Every 2 to 12 houses inside our neighborhood at the curb. Or they're going and knocking on neighbors' doors now and saying, hey, we might give you this new shiny phone. You're going to get the best reception for all your wireless if you'll just let us put a cell antenna on your roof. So we've got a lot of work at the federal level to stop that. There have been some lawsuits, those haven't been won yet, but they're allowed to do it. And unless you and I know better and teach our neighbors to know better, your neighbor could very well give approval to put a cell tower on their roof that's not only going to make them sick, but you as well. So we need to find our voice on this and learn it. And as Lori mentioned, we're doing these free webinars twice a month. So as you open this conversation, once you get your head around it, as you open this conversation with others, they can always come to one of our current education sessions and learn. And our videos are posted online as well. So here's the kicker. Up in Washington, D.C., at a commerce hearing, Senator Richard Blumenthal out of Connecticut said to two of the industry leaders, please share with us how much money have you invested in independent science to prove that 5G is safe before it came to market. And the industry reps kind of hemmed and hawed and spun their stuff. And in the end, they both admitted they don't know of any independent science to prove that this was safe before it came to market. So Senator Blumenthal says, so as far as health and safety is concerned, we are flying blind here. And that's the reality. And then Computer World and others are already calling out 5G as a bad joke. We're not getting any better signals. We're not getting faster speeds. It's just their way of monetizing what's left of the electromagnetic spectrum with these little millimeter waves. And for what we hear about, oh, we need it for advancing medicine. Nobody in medicine is going to use wireless, because what if the power goes out and you're in the middle of an operation? You're always going to use a wired connection. So, you know, it's industry spin, and we need to learn to differentiate the facts from what the industry has been telling us. Same thing with electric cars, self-driving cars. You don't need to have a wireless radiating antenna. There are other technologies with echolocation that can be used that wouldn't be harming everybody in and around that car. So the industry doesn't care. Verizon was touting in their press release that they're bringing 5G to 100 million people this year, you know. Dr. Beverly Rubrick, Dr. Rob Brown, who's a radiologist, they have come out with a paper showing an evidence for connections between COVID-19 and these cities that have inundated their residents with 5G close range technology. And for 5G to fly, they're going to have a lot more of the big cell antennas and towers to be the backbone for 5G. So with all this saturation in our communities, they know that this is a huge risk when you get something like a pandemic, because our bodies biologically only have so much energy in their cells. And so if you now add a virus on top of the body that's trying to fight off all of this radiation day and night and losing, when you get a pandemic, you are going to have higher death rates and you're going to have higher incidence of the disease. And that's exactly what they found in this paper here. So here's Dr. Havas's project. We won't spend a lot of time, but you can go here to globalemf.net. And if you're interested in participating to get your town or where you go on vacation or wherever you're traveling, you can just take an hour or two and do the protocol with your little clipboard paper and then enter it into our database, and you would be doing our world a great service. And as I said, Rob Metzinger of Safe Living Technologies is offering a discount to those who agree to help Dr. Havas. You'll get a discount on that meter. Okay. So in the outdoor environment, there was a conference held in Austria many years ago that said, if we could keep it to 1,000 or less outdoors, presuming you're moving around outdoors, so you're hopefully not sitting right under one of these for any length of time. But if you're out moving around and there's 1,000 microwatts out there, presuming you get to go home to a clean environment where you have good sleep and you can cell repair, if we could get to 1,000 outdoors, that would be a pretty good goal. So here's an example in Westmoreland, New Hampshire, and thank you to our citizen scientists who did this, in the green with 417. Keene, New Hampshire, not so great. And this, I think, was before they started installing their small cells or their close range big cell antennas, getting into the danger zone in the yellow. Nashua, New Hampshire, already in the danger zone. Concord, New Hampshire, not great. Stratham, New Hampshire, in the blackout zone with cell towers right on top of the neighborhood. And then in the North End in Boston on Hanover Street, this is the part of Boston where we've got these incredible Italian restaurants and pastry shops. We took readings down there of 613,000 microwatts per square meter. And when you go down the main tourist street, Hanover Street, you see these beautiful wrought iron, what look to be lampposts, but those are microwave radiation antennas right on top of everybody on the street. But then when you walk down Hanover Street and you look at one of the cross streets, where you have people living right on top of these buildings, right at eye level with these cell towers, they don't invest in these beautiful, devices here. Not that beauty makes it any safer. You see these ugly gray monopoles with a canister right on top of it down the street. So the industry will always take the path of least resistance. If there's already electricity run, that's great for them. If there's already a road paved, that's where they're going to go. Instead of going far out into the woods and putting a tall cell tower up, they're encroaching closer and closer because it's a lot cheaper and faster and highly profitable. So Dr. Martin Luther King taught us when we actually affect meaningful social change and we change the social norm, it comes through 3 channels. The public engages and learns about it and then starts using their voice, which is what we're hoping to inspire with you today. The courts eventually held the industry or the guilty accountable, and then public policy catches up to the science in this case and enacts protective measures. And so I know we're getting close to where we wanted to be for our time tonight, but I want to quickly just show you. And you can dive into this later. We'll have all the links when this video is posted. My slides will be posted in the description of the video on YouTube. But I want you to know what's out here because we've got amazing things happening in all of these areas. So the FCC has been sued for ignoring the science, and the courts, looking at 11,000 pages of evidence that were entered into the public record, they turned to the FCC and said, why are you still reaffirming those levels of radiation from 1996? Where's your homework to say that's what we should be doing? And the FCC had no homework. There are no studies showing safety. And the judges are looking at 11,000 pages of evidence of harm. So it's been remanded is the term. It's been remanded back to the FCC. The court ruled that they were arbitrary and capricious, which basically means they didn't do their homework. And they've told the FCC to come up to speed with this and update their standards to protect children, to protect the environment, to account for infertility, to account for neurotoxicity, and all these other harms that are shown in the scientific literature. So what does that mean? It means the fox is watching the hen house still. We hope that it will advance, but it's going to take a long time. The FCC is, prone to dragging this out as long as they can while they let the industry keep pushing all this toxic technology in. Other lawsuits have opened up the way to go back and reclaim the money that we all paid on our internet bills to bring the right solution, which is skip all these close range wireless things, bring fiber to and through the premises, and do not allow our towns to put the wireless nodes up on the backbone of fiber optics. So there was a lawsuit because the wireless industry took all that money that should have brought broadband right to our premises, and they took that money through some clever accounting, and they started using it to pay for all this toxic wireless. So this lawsuit was won against the FCC, and we think that our states can now go back and start demanding that money back to install proper technology. The FDA, again, should be protecting us, and they're not. And our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology now have a petition to say, we want you to declare imminent hazard, that this radiation is hazardous and it should not be exposed to the public. So people can take an action step here. Lots of good things are happening here in Massachusetts. We have something called legal guidelines for our boards of health. And we now have 4 pages about cell towers in there saying we need to be careful with this. In Pittsfield, Massachusetts, the Board of Health investigated. They are the first in the United States to write up a well-documented cease and desist order. Unfortunately, their Board of Selectmen and their mayor, we think, have received conflicting messaging from the industry and think they're going to get sued and bankrupt their town. We don't think legally that holds any water, but they scared them. And so the Board of Health has pulled back on that cease and desist order, but they are committed to doing something to protect those citizens, because 20 children and adults got really sick when Verizon turned on a cell tower on top of their neighborhood 2 years ago. And now, after the second summer, now we're on the third summer, the pollinators have all disappeared. There's a gentleman who's been gardening for 20 some odd years, and he has to go out and hand pollinate his garden. So lots of other really good things happening in the courts, and you can look further into that at these links. Policy solutions. New Hampshire is leading the nation. Deb Hodgson, who's with us tonight from New Hampshire for Safe Technology, she got really, really, really sick, and her doctors couldn't figure it out. People who get sick, their doctors haven't been trained. But now we have that EMF medical conference. They can be trained online on their own time and receive 24.5 continuing medical education credits. We'll give you the link to that as well. But Deb got so sick, her doctors couldn't figure it out. And then you wind up spending thousands of dollars out of pocket going to specialists. They can't figure it out. And then somebody like Deb, who's very smart, starts investigating what her symptoms could mean and discovers radio frequency microwave illnesses. And so she figured out in her house what was going on, and she remediated, and she was getting pushback from her family, from her kids, from her husband, which is very typical. So don't be hurt when that happens. It's just part and parcel for people coming up to speed. But once Deb cleaned out her environment, there was a plant that had been sitting dormant in her window for a very long time. After she let the radiation go, that plant shot up like 2 feet in a very short amount of time, in just a couple of months. And that convinced her family that, wow, maybe mom's not crazy. Maybe there is something biologically happening here. So when Representative Patrick Abrami knocked on Deb Hodgson's door, she invited him in, shared with him what her journey had been. And he's an electrical engineer. All he ever knew was that you had to have heat to have harm. So God bless Representative Patrick Abrami. He went and did the deep dive and had this major wow moment when he started reading the science. And then he wrote a bill. Deb introduced me to Rep. Abrami. They both came down in his car from New Hampshire to my home in Massachusetts. We sat at the kitchen table all afternoon and helped him to connect the dots. And then he enhanced his bill with these really important questions. Why do Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, AM Best, and others, why have they long since recognized this as a world-leading risk? And they don't cover for damages from wireless radiation. That should cause all of our towns and legislators to sit up and take notice, because that leaves our towns holding the bag for liability when there's no insurance for this on the wireless industry. Why does that legal fine print that we looked at say to keep it away from our bodies? Why is the FCC ignoring thousands of peer-reviewed science? And why aren't they accounting for the non-thermal, non-ionizing radiation? And why do we allow 100 times more radiation than certain other countries do? Why is nobody looking at the cumulative effect? Because our FCC guidelines, remember, only account for one device for a short period of time. What happens when you put 20 or 30 children in a classroom, all of them having a wireless device with wireless access points on the ceilings, with wearables, with cell phones, all of that? Every single antenna goes out like a pebble in a pond. It ripples out to everybody in pulses from many, many, many different devices. and nobody is accounting for that. So we were very honored to testify in New Hampshire. The retired president of Microsoft Canada flew in, Dr. Paul Heroux, who's one of the world's leading scientists up at McGill University, who's created cancer in his lab using radio frequency. He came down to testify, as did our wonderful citizens in New Hampshire. We got that bill through the House Committee on Science, Tech, and Energy, through the Senate Committee on Health and Human Services, and under Governor Sununu's pen, passed into law to investigate, to form a commission and investigate what this technology is. Even during the pandemic, they stuck to their one-year deadline, and they came out with this groundbreaking report that finally a government body has documented the conflicts of interest with the wireless industry and our government agencies, and it's making 15 recommendations to get our federal delegates on board with this and change the broken laws that allowed this to happen. Put signs up on everything that's transmitting. Educate the public like we're doing here today, and start transitioning our towns and our schools to safe, hardwired technology. And again, it's not rocket science, folks, just hardwire it. You get a better, faster, more reliable signal. It's much greener, and your data and privacy are far more protected. So this year in January, they started writing a bill that would address a couple of bites of the elephant. First, let's make sure that they can't put up any more close range cell towers, right? So that's what this New Hampshire bill does. Representative Abrami introduced House Bill 1644, bipartisan support. Get that setback from where the science shows the harm starts to come down at least. And then when people get sick, there's nowhere they can report it to. So let's get a registry of harm. Let's have the wireless industry pay for it and have a state level, state-run registry. Dr. Kent Chamberlain from the University of New Hampshire worked in the industry for 30 years. He's well-established, well-published. He worked with EMFs. He served on the board of certain groups with the professional organization that's the IEEE, or the Institute for Electrical and Electronic Engineering. And he's highly credible. He thought this was going to be a slam dunk. Of course, wireless is fine, but he's a man of integrity. And once he started learning the science and researching it himself in very credible journals, he has come up with a 20-minute presentation, and his slides are available to show the science that shows that we need to do better and the industry needs to step up and start fixing this. Frank Clegg has told us the industry will pivot. There will still be great revenues to be earned. We'll still go on, but we need to give them that nudge. And so this presentation with Kent Chamberlain's slides were done to teach our legislators how come we're asking for this legislation and we're not making this stuff up. Frank Clegg also came and testified, sent in testimony this time because he couldn't leave Canada because of the pandemic, but he sent in his testimony, and that's a really good tool for all of us to use because he gives it to us from an industry perspective. He's telling us that wireless is no longer the preferred technology. It's poor technology. We should be doing fiber to and through the premises. So it's outlived its useful life. And then New Hampshire is transparent, at least with their hearings. We can never know what goes on behind closed doors, but everybody can watch the hearings. And now they have a subcommittee. So the good news is there were 21 people on the Science, Tech, and Energy Committee. All 21 agreed that something needs to be looked at here. So they didn't kill the bill. What they did is they opted to have an interim study of 8 subcommittee members that will look at this. And by the end of the year, they have to either say, we're done with this issue and we're not going to address it through this bill, or we have a new session starting in January and here's what we're going to propose. So they'll write another bill. So our fear is that we're going to get caught in this do loop of new legislators on these committees every time. And then we're going to have to start at square one and start educating, which is going to take a couple of years for them to make their decisions in the legislature. And then there's going to be a whole nother set of new legislators. So we're afraid of getting caught in this little do loop here. And so we want to do everything within our power, which is to educate you so that you will speak up to your legislators and say, hey, come to one of these webinars. I need you to know this because I don't want a cell tower in my front yard or my backyard. And I want our schools protected and I want our elderly protected. So we have to start at the grassroots level and empower our public servants to pass this kind of legislation. Because if you watch these hearings, they're bringing in their big guns. The industry is bringing in their big guns to spread all the disinformation that makes it sound like this is all fine and good when it's not. So we all have to get engaged in this. Here you can go in and drill down. There are, one of the things the industry tells our towns is, oh, these guys are just the NIMBYs. They just don't want a cell tower in their backyard because they don't want the look of it. And they'll convince your town that they're the only ones who are saying anything. Well, that's not true. If you go to Americans for Responsible Technology, you will see more than 150 groups in states all over the country who don't want this technology. And they certainly don't want it right on top of them. So the industry just spins up disinformation at every turn. But you can go in and dig around and see what other communities are doing and look for inspiration. I do a monthly meeting where anybody in the world is welcome to join us for Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And we invite people to tell us what's going on in their community, what have we learned, what blew up, what went well, and just keep the conversation going so we can all stay inspired. But here again, lots of things that have happened. And as all the good things happen, there are national groups like Americans for Responsible Technology that cull the best practices and put them in a format that anybody, you or I, can just come learn from and then take their samples, like a sample ordinance and a checklist. How does our local zoning bylaw stack up? Who knew? Most of our towns have something that is called something like a wireless communication facility ordinance. Was that influenced by industry, or do they have setbacks in there that wouldn't allow any of this to come right on top of us? If your town doesn't, or if you don't know, you want to talk with your town planners, your zoning board, your planning board, your health board, and see where the starting point is, and then grab these terrific resources where you can get a checklist and you can see what other towns have done so that they can get a comfort level with, wow, we're kind of behind the 8 ball in our town, aren't we? Look at what these other towns have already done. So know that those resources are available locally. And I love this, a smart grandmother in Connecticut figured it out, brought it to her town. They said, until this can be proven safe, we're putting a moratorium on 5G. And they just re-upped it. They did this a couple of years ago and they just reaffirmed this ban this spring. So lots of good inspiration happening, and you can look more into that. In our schools, so it's very telling what Silicon Valley executives are doing. And in the New York Times, they reported that Silicon Valley execs are, first of all, keeping the technology from their own kids. They're sending their children to schools with no technology, not wireless, not hardwired. They know that a child's brain develops properly and they learn best, not from a screen, but from meaningful interactions with their teachers who inspire them and hold them accountable, with the loving adults in their lives, with their peers, and with their natural environment. So they're sending their kids to schools with no technology while they force all of this into our schools. And then, there's a whole series of articles at this link, but they're actually having their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children while they pollute our children. So again, God bless our friends, Patty and Doug Wood. They have Americans for Responsible Technology. Another project they have is Tech Safe Schools, and they've got a whole toolkit here for you to open the conversation with your schools. And on your behalf, they will send a letter with the facts to your school administrator. So please take advantage of this, because the industry at this very moment is giving our towns money to put cell towers up on our school property. Where are our kids ever going to get a break? So we have training off the shelf ready to go, or we will at the end of the summer when we get to our new platform. And then our friends at Environmental Health Trust This is one of the groups that not only has this massive database of credible information, they've got leading doctors and scientists on their board, but they also have a whole page of resources where you can print simple fact sheets or print out little postcards to give to people as you have these conversations. They helped Maryland become the first public health agency to recommend hardwiring schools. We have low EMF best practices with something called the US Collaborative for High Performance Schools, which has criteria for green schools, and there's a whole module on man-made electromagnetic fields, including dirty electricity. And then other countries, Cyprus, for example, when the pandemic hit, they gave their families safety recommendations. Choose hardwiring. If you can't, for some reason, hardwire, create distance. They have guidelines for how many minutes a day certain age groups should be exposed to an electronic device. So we're way behind here in the US because this is where all the money is flowing. But know that these are excellent resources to help with this conversation at your schools. We have professional solutions. Here's the medical conference. The price has been brought down so low that your doctors and nurses can be trained for less than $100. And then for anybody who just wants to go take that training, who doesn't need continuing education credits, you can get these videos with a license to use them for a couple of years. And you can watch these videos with others for $39. So if you want to go straight to the experts, here it is. Dr. Cindy Russell also founded Physicians for Safe Technology. She's got the science listed by category, the mechanisms of harm, excellent website for healthcare practitioners. And then for the professionals in the engineering, physics, technology, architecture space, there are excellent resources here for them as well. So again, for you and I, these courses are quick and easy. For do-it-yourselfers, you're going to figure this out. It's not that hard to do once you start realizing that my goal is to hardwire. Let me do a gap analysis. Where are all these things coming from in my home? One by one, what can I do? But if that's not your thing, you can hire a professional. There's an entire profession called building biologists who are certified, trained consultants who can be hired to help you do this work. They will do a report on what your exposures are, and then it's up to you. You might take that report and just start fixing things, or you can hire building biologists and or electricians to come in and fix the radiation exposures, the dirty electricity, any high electric and magnetic fields that might be causing harm. Just know there are people here at every turn to help you. This film, Generation Zapped, is an excellent way to open up the conversation and just show in a very, very useful way in 74 minutes. It's non-threatening. It's got great resources in there, kind of funny in some parts, but a professionally made film that is now on Amazon Prime. And our libraries are offering it through their streaming services in many cases. And then look at this, even on PBS, Bert Wolf, who does a travel show, he collaborated with some of the experts and came up with 2 episodes, each under a half an hour, that address the need to take care of radio frequency radiation. And then again, our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology, they have done our hard work. They've got a whole toolkit with a checklist, with ordinances from towns who have already taken charge of this. So our towns don't know about it, and they need you and I to speak up and teach them about this. So you don't have to go it alone. You can keep sharing the information, and just know that everything we do, our kids are watching and emulating us. So watch what you do. Watch what example you set for the children in your life, and set limits and go back to having meaningful conversations where there are no screens allowed. You know, when I was raising my kids, we had a rule, no toys at the table. Same thing with technology, no technology at the table. Create your sacred spaces, the bedroom, the dining room table, outside when you're out together. And I love this poster here, 50 Ways to Take a Break, to remind us, what did we do with our time before we got saturated in technology? So you know, lots of good things. Listen to music, go talk to a neighbor, go help an elderly neighbor, go write poetry, go write to a friend, call somebody, go meditate, you know, go for a walk in nature, go dance, you know, go create music, all these things that are good for our brain. And then this book called The Earth Prescription brings up a new field of science. Well, it's actually not new. It's been around for a lot of years. Earthing or grounding means every living thing was meant to be connected directly to the earth because we get healing energy through the electrons that come up into our body and allow us to regulate our biological systems. But if we walk around on rubber-soled shoes or shoes with metal in the sole, that blocks the electrons from giving us that free healing energy. And so this Dr. Laura Conover has written The Earth Prescription, and she takes it season by season, how even if you live like we do in cold climates, how you can ground naturally in our world without taking your shoes off. So I really loved that book, and I was so honored when she reached out and asked if I would read her manuscript. And I couldn't be more tickled with these really easy ways. So I've integrated that into my daily routine. I get out and ground several times a day, naturally. Just touching the leaves with a high water content on a plant instantly grounds you to that plant. So lots of great tips in there. And just know at the municipal level, we have a ton of resources. This book called Reinventing Wires gives a dozen reasons why wireless is not what our communities should be investing in. It's not sustainable, right? So lots of good things, but always measure using the biological limits, not those crooked FCC limits. And the CDC has something called the Alara Principle, which directs us to get to as low as reasonably achievable with radiation emissions. So create as much distance from every transmitting device as you can. Turn off the signals where you can. So reduce your exposures, create distance, and shield if you have to. And if you're going to do shielding, I highly recommend you hire a building biologist or another EMF expert, because there are some pitfalls if you don't do it right. It can actually cause more harm. So if you do shielding, make sure you and a professional do it together. But Alara right now at the CDC applies to the heat effect, the thermal, ionizing radiation, and it's high time we start applying that to the non-ionizing radiation as well. So again, no safe level of man-made radiation in the scientific literature. So we need to start weaning ourselves from it. We need to step up and follow the lead of the legislators who are so courageously working on this, and we need to empower them because they're going to get pushback at every turn. So please join us for the upcoming education sessions. We have fact sheets, you know, we can do quick online training. And once you protect yourselves, please consider plucking up the courage to protect your town. There's no cavalry coming to do this for you. You and I have to open these conversations with our towns and hold them accountable at every turn. Every time you open a conversation, say, okay, what are our next steps and on what date are we going to follow up? Because otherwise, everybody's plate is already overflowing while the industry is pushing this toxic infrastructure closer and closer to our homes. So we have, again, all these great tools for you to do these. And most of our town attorneys have no idea. All they've heard is what the industry has spun up. There are attorneys like Andrew Campanelli who used to work for the industry, figured out what was going on, and now they can be hired to rewrite your town zoning bylaws for, I think his fee right now is like $8,500, which is a drop in the bucket on a town budget to get this right. Otherwise, your town might get sued for allowing close range microwave radiation in. So preventive measures are definitely the way to go. And don't be shy about introducing your town attorneys. He will do a free consult online, and then you can pay him to do the rewrite of your zoning bylaws. So educate our communities. I can be brought in to do forums like this. Other towns have brought me in to speak, and gosh, protect those kids, train our schools to do this right. And then look around and say, huh, I belong to a professional organization. Maybe we should have Cece or some expert come in and teach our professional organization about this, because we all need to know about it. So start where you are, right? Protect yourselves. Use this little graphic here to plug in at home and turn off your exposures. Start noticing what's radiating. Start with baby steps. Get the Ethernet cables. Create a sleep sanctuary. Put your devices in airplane mode as the default. Don't leave things just radiating. Let your friends, your loved ones, your colleagues know that you're taking precautions, and here's how you can get in touch with me. And it's really kind of nice not to be at everybody's beck and call all the time. Take your life back, set boundaries. I put an out of office responder on the weekends. I call it my unplugged responder, to say, I'm unplugging for the weekend. You know, I'll catch you on Monday, or if it's a personal friend or family, they know to call me on my landline. And then our friends at Environmental Health Trust has this resource pages where you can get all these incredible 1-page, 2-page fact sheets to make it easy to have these conversations. So thank you so much for sticking with us. In our slides, you'll be able to get directly to New Hampshire for Safe Technologies Facebook page. Here's how you can reach out by email. Here's how you can reach me at our website here. And you can always email us directly at massforsafetech@gmail.com. So I will stop screen sharing, and our wonderful co-hosts, I think, have probably been looking at the chat, and we'll open it up now for questions and answers. If Deb or Lori want to chime in and share anything with us at this time, that would be a good time to do so, and then others can raise their hands and we will take questions.
Sure, I'll chime in, Cece, with two things that were news to me today anyways. One is in Carmel, New York. The Mahopic neighbors won a suit against their town and Verizon to stop a cell tower in the neighborhood because their town failed to do a proper review.
Excellent.
So people can look into that in detail, either on our Facebook page. It's out on Environmental Health Trust. That's where I shared that from. But this really interesting one to me is in the northwestern part of Massachusetts, the Buxton School, which is a college prep boarding school. And they have notified their incoming students as well as their staff that there will be no smart devices of any kind allowed on campus for anyone starting this fall.
Oh, fantastic, Deb.
Fun to watch. That's just north of Pittsfield. I looked on a map, so it's not too far from Pittsfield.
That is a phenomenal example that we'll be sure to share. And these inspirational things, you know, some of us have been in the trenches on this for a long time. I'm almost up to a decade, but our friends in other corners have been doing this for 2 or 3 decades. And it can be exhausting, and people may want to just throw their hands up in the air and walk away, but people deserve a right to know. So we all stay for as long as we can and do this work. And Deb, I'm so grateful to you. You have offered your time to us to keep our Facebook page up to date with all these incredible things that you're finding. So folks, if you go to Facebook, you will find things on New Hampshire for Safe Technology, Massachusetts for Safe Technology. If you don't like to go on Facebook, then you can go out to Environmental Health Trust. You can go to our website at Massachusetts for Safe Technology. You can go to Americans for Responsible Technology. And you know, you'll find all of that inside my slides when we post the video. So Deb, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Was there anything in the chat that we should address?
There was about how do you get your home assessed, but the person who asked is now off the call.
Okay, well, hopefully they'll look at the recording and they'll learn that we can do that through the Building Biology Institute. Any other questions from our guests with us today?
Feel free to raise your hand.
Okay, Lori, did you want to comment?
Yeah, I would like to encourage everyone on the call tonight to put a call or an email into their state representative to be on the lookout for HB 1644. They might be on the Interim Study Committee or the Science and Technology and Education Committee. And that would be particularly important that they hear from you. And those that are not on those committees, well, they may hear down the line that this bill is moving along. So if this presentation has convinced you that you don't want an antenna or a cell tower anywhere near your home or the local schools, for example, I would just encourage you to just shoot an email out to your representative as soon as you can and ask them to please support safe setbacks for wireless antennas and towers and HB 1644.
Yeah, and HB 1644 applies especially to those people in New Hampshire, but for everybody, if the citizens are not talking up to their legislators, they're not going to address it. So let this inspire you to reach out and say, we need to change, the way we're doing business and bring technology to and through the premises. And how can we support you in getting that done, right?
We have something else in the chat. Have you seen the symptoms improve even after years of exposure when you remediate? And for me, absolutely. It was immediate. And it took me probably over the last few years when I am exposed, I know certain things that I can do, and my recovery typically is much quicker than it was before. So.
Yeah. Good. And I can share a couple stories from my family too. I shared my daughter where we got rid of the wireless in our home and her headaches and nosebleeds almost disappeared entirely. And then with my mom, when she was 92, I went into her little senior apartment, and in her little bedroom with a twin bed, she had the base station for her decked cordless phone, which sits there like a cell tower pulsating all the time in this country. And she also had the router in her bedroom, and her cell phone was kicking around somewhere. So I taught her how to remediate all of those things. And the next time I spoke to her a couple of weeks later, she said, that night you left, I slept for, I think she said 10 hours. And I said, wow, that sounds pretty good. What do you normally do? She said, I don't. It takes me forever to fall asleep. I would wake up all night long and I'd be so loopy by morning that I have to perch myself on the bed before I trusted myself to get up and go. And I said, and now what? And she said, ever since you fixed that stuff, I've been sleeping through the night every single night, and I just get out of bed and go. And she was still driving her car and doing her paintings. And, so it can be that immediate. And my brother, I went into his apartment, and he had 4 adult children who are now gainfully employed and thought it was really cool to give dad the latest and greatest electronics. So I go around his apartment, and he's got this soundboard on his, smart TV and all this stuff. And he's a voracious reader. So they had given him an e-reader, and he sat with that thing for hours a night. And all you have to do is download the content onto it and then turn off the antennas. So I set him up with how to do that. And I met him for breakfast the next morning. And he said, I left everything off last night. And this persistent headache I've had over my eye, I realize is gone. And I got it when I started using this e-reader. So for months, he's had a headache, and turning it off that one night, it got better. So yeah, it can be that quick. Lori, you had your hand up.
Yeah, somebody's asking for whether you can buy a meter for under $200. And I was going to suggest that you go to a website called Less EMF, and they do have a variety of less expensive meters. And I think the tri-field meter, the new tri-field meter might be one option. And there are definitely acoustimeter type things, but I also went in with a neighbor and we split the cost, and that really made sense because we got the Safe and Sound Pro 2, the really good meter. So you might also consider that.
That's great, Lori. Yeah, I know another one under the $200 mark is the Cornet. And there's another website. Actually, Jeremy Johnson is the Silicon Valley engineer that I referenced. He and his doctor wife both got sick from the smart meters, but he is dedicating his life to helping others. And if you go to his website called emfanalysis.com, he has a set of recommendations because he became sick from this. So And the guys at Less EMF are great too. So there are different places you can go for recommendations. Jeremy also has some thoughts that he shares there about products like little pendants or harmonizers that people are tempted to buy. He has some thoughts to share on that you might want to look at before you invest in things.
I also wanted to share with people that when I went on this journey, I was originally looking to protect myself as much from blood clots because I had been on Coumadin for years. And when I hardwired our home and got rid of all the Wi-Fi in our cars, what I didn't realize was the amount of symptoms I was having that I had no idea was actually related to this. You know, I knew the blood clot part was an issue, but I seriously thought I had early onset dementia. I was getting lost in my own town and it scared me. I've lived here almost 40 years. I couldn't remember anything during the day. It was frightening. And my family kind of joked, thought it was, funny. I was putting things in the wrong place, but it was very, very scary. And I had severe dry eyes. I was at the cardiologist. I had AFib and all these horrible things besides insomnia and everything, tinnitus, everything else, but everything, high blood pressure, everything went away. The only thing I still have lingering is a low case of tinnitus, but everything went away pretty immediately.
That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal, Deb. And that reminds me, the International Association of Firefighters, they have a position statement from 2004 saying that they don't want this wireless infrastructure on their cell or on their fire stations, because what happened is out in Santa Barbara, California, and very likely elsewhere, these firefighters were going out to respond to emergencies in their community after a cell tower had been installed. And like Deb said, they couldn't remember where they were going to respond to an emergency in towns that they had serviced for years. And when they got there, they couldn't remember how to administer emergency protocols. So Dr. Gunnar Hauser is one of the doctors who presented at the EMF Medical Conference, and he did functional MRIs on the brains of these firefighters and saw that it had changed the gray matter of the brain. So it's very serious, and it comes down to education. The more we can get this word out and present the credible peer-reviewed scientific literature, the more we can not only protect ourselves, but our communities as well, because we're already, as an industrialized nation, all of them, we're hovering right at the brink of where we can't reproduce ourselves anymore. We're down 50% as a nation on our sperm count. And what we are reproducing, more than half of today's children have a chronic illness. So our species is not doing so good these days, but we always have hope because, like Deb shared, bit by bit, towns and schools and families are figuring this out, and we always have hope, right? Yeah. Okay, any other comments tonight? Oh, somebody's asking what Lori's glasses are.
Yeah, I did respond to that. These are blue light blockers. There's many of them out there, anywhere from $10 to hundreds, depending on whether you need a prescription or, so I don't really know, which company's the best. I just have a few pair and I wear them mostly closer to the evening, closer to bedtime to block the blue light, which does reduce the melatonin, which does affect sleep. I also have a special screen on the computer that is supposed to reduce eye damage, because blue light is really not only affects the eyes, but it does affect the brain and the functioning of the body when we get too much of it. And the computer screen, can be dimmed also, but then it's harder to read the screen. So
more eye strain.
You gotta find balance.
You know what that reminds me of, Lori, is Dr. Magda Havas up in Canada and Sheena Symington, who runs the Electrosensitive Society. First, anybody who is suffering from symptoms, I highly recommend you connect with the Electrosensitive Society. They do a support group meeting once a week. And for anybody who gets sick, it's a very lonely place to be. So don't leave yourself alone. Go join their supports there. But they've also started doing lectures from medical professionals, and they've started a new series, and you'll find that out at the Electrosensitive Society. And they just had a Dr. Corey Deacon give a couple of lectures. I know the first one was definitely posted about EMFs. And then the second one that they did a week or two ago, he came back and gave a lecture on light therapy. And he makes some recommendations for some good reputable companies to get the glasses from. And when that video is up, folks can go look for that as well. But he really underscored that we've gotten away from being out in the natural light, and that natural light feeds our circadian rhythm, and that light triggers the timing of all the different organs around the clock that do their thing at a different time. So if we're not getting out and getting natural light, that too can be hampering what our circadian rhythm is, you know, queued up and ready to do. So he recommends that the early morning light is really important, and then the late day light is really important. And the midday light is great too. He's not a big believer in sunscreens because it blocks too much of the important elements of the light from getting into our bodies and our brains. So, you know, you listen to his lecture though, I was really taken by what he had to say. But lots of good resources. Okay. All right, everybody. Well, thank you so very much for joining us tonight. I know others are going to be welcoming the video when that's ready to be sent out. And just please keep learning, keep sharing, and keep inviting others to join the conversation. And we're honored to continue with these free webinars so long as people are coming to them. Our August and September ones are now posted, I think, in the chat. And you can find, if anybody's not used to working with the chat, down on the very bottom where the chat is, there's 3 little dots. If you click on that, it will save the chat to your computer. Okay. So thanks, everybody. Come back, bring other people who you think ought to know, and don't be shy about starting this conversation with others. It's expected that they'll look at you like you have 3 heads. Stay calm, professional, and have the facts in hand. All right, everybody, take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.